The Detroit Lions have made no secret about the fact that their intention is to win in the here and now, and they've pushed all of their chips to the center of the table in order to get that done. However, the question is, has the team done enough to push themselves over the proverbial hump? And what's next for the franchise? With that, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you a pleasant good evening and thank you for joining us today. My name's Kevin McShan, and we're honored this evening to be joined by Dan Miller, the voice of the Detroit Lions, who's here now to answer everything related to the Honolulu Blue and Silver. Dan, so great to see you, and thanks
Kevin.
for being here today.
Appreciate it.
So, Dan, the Lions are in a state of transition, and there seems to be a renewed energy and confidence since the hiring of new head coach Jim Caldwell. So, could you just give me your initial impressions of the staff?
Well, I think this. I think anytime you have change, the thing that you always look for in sports, you look for hope. Mm-hmm. And I think when you have a change, there becomes hope and there's renewal. And I think that's what you had here. I think this team is talented, and I think they're very talented. And I think that if you look at the collapses that they've had the last two seasons, that's ultimately what cost Jim Schwartz his job. Why that happened, I don't know, because you had a team that was in the playoff race a couple years ago at 4-4 and then fell apart. And then you had a team last year that was 6-3 and fell apart after that. I can't answer the reason why, but Jim Caldwell comes in. I've had a chance to spend some time with him. To your point about this team pushing their chips to the middle of the table, he was very clear at a sponsors luncheon I was at and saying, this isn't about winning tomorrow, this is about winning today. And he talked about, believing in this team, believing in the talent they have, and going after this thing right now. And I think that when you look at where they are, line them up offensively, defensively. This is a potent team. They have a couple holes. There's no doubt about that, but there's still time to maybe fill those holes between now and training camp. But I'm very excited about where this team is right now.
And to that point, if the Lions are going to be successful, obviously the relationship between Caldwell and Stafford has to be a successful one. So I'm wondering if you could share with us how you think the dynamics of that relationship will play out.
Well, I think there's more to it than that. I think you're right. I think that dynamic is going to be important, but I think you also have Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, and Jim Bob Cooter, the quarterback coach. And I think that
a team effort.
No question, and it always is in the NFL. And, I think that Stafford needs to be better, but I do think that it's not all on him. I think if you look at what this team has had to work with the past couple of years, there were times when you looked at the depth chart and you looked out on the field and you had Calvin Johnson and a bunch of guys that have been out of the league. Now, that doesn't mean that Kevin Ogletree and Chris Durham and Jeremy Ross aren't NFL players, but I don't know that they're frontline starters. They haven't shown the ability to be that, but because of injuries to Burleson, injuries to Ryan Broyles, off-the-field problems with Titus Young, these guys were pushed into that type of position. Mm-hmm. So I think very clearly this coaching staff said, number one, we need to get Stafford right. Number two, one of the ways we'll do that is to improve the talent around him. Sign Golden Tate, draft Eric Ebron, bring in guys that now you look at that offense where you got, Golden Tate, Calvin Johnson, Eric Ebron, Brandon Pettigrew, Reggie Bush. It's going to be real tough for defenses to handle that, but Stafford also has to produce. And I'm very, very bullish on Matthew Stafford. I believe he's a big-time talent. I think he's got to put it all together, but I think the pieces are there now that he can do that. And back to your original question, I think that relationship is important. And the nice thing is, Joe Lombardi's got great history with Drew Brees. And Jim Caldwell's got great history with Peyton Manning, and he helped Joe Flacco win a Super Bowl. So you've got guys now who have helped develop quarterbacks into big-time players.
Transitioning now to Ndamukong Suh has obviously been a hot topic of conversation in Allen Park and amongst the fans this offseason. And we heard earlier this week, or yesterday, when Caldwell ended the rookie minicamp, that he expected him to be here during the OTA. So I'm wondering your impressions of his future with the team and his offseason inactivity to this point?
Yeah, I think a couple things there. I think, number one, I don't think it's necessarily been inactivity in terms of him. I think it's been a lack of attendance. I have no doubt that Ndamukong Suh is working hard and is in great shape and ready to play football. I don't know why he hasn't been here. I do think it's important that he is. But I'm unlike some, I'm not overly concerned about it. I think Suh is Suh. He's kind of his own guy. He's going to do what he's going to do. Important thing for me is that he shows up on Sunday and plays, and he's the best defensive player on that team. And in my opinion, it's not real close. He's the best defensive player on that team. And if they're going to go anywhere, you need Suh to be a big part of that. Now, as for his future, here's what I don't know. I don't know how negotiations are going. I don't know if he's being reasonable. I don't know what their offer is. I don't know where any of that stuff's going. So you kind of got to wait and see how that thing plays out. My guess is he gets a contract. He plays in Detroit for a long time. That's my guess.
And moving to the draft, going into the draft, Martin Mayhew said the team needed impact players. So I'm wondering your thoughts on just the overall draft class itself and whether they've accomplished that goal.
Well, I think right off the top, they got two very high impact players and two guys that are going to start right away and play a lot. I was a fan of Ebron. I wrote a column for the TV website a couple days before the draft in which I said, you know, I made the case for a couple of guys, but I said right now I was leaning towards Ebron, and I went into the draft that way. Again, going back to what I said about the fact that Stafford hasn't had a lot to work with. They've tried to get guys, but it hasn't worked. And I think sometimes people look at those efforts of players they've tried to bring in and think that the Lions are going too much in terms of getting those guys. But the bottom line is if it doesn't work, you got to keep trying. This is a big-time talent, big-time difference maker, matchup nightmare, guy that I think is going to change a lot of things they can do on offense and open up the field even more for Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate, Reggie Bush, Joique Bell. I think that was a big get. And Van Noy is a guy that's kind of been connected to the Lions for a while. That Sam linebacker position is going to be different than we've seen it in a long time. I think he's the most athletic linebacker we've had in Detroit in quite some time, probably since maybe even Reggie Brown in my mind. I think that he is a guy that they're going to line up on the line of scrimmage. He's going to get after the quarterback. He's going to drop in pass coverage. It's not going to be that basic 4 men up front, 3 right behind him. He's going to be right in there next to the defensive end, and I think it's going to be exciting to watch. And I think he's an impact player that's very exciting.
So it sounds, by the sound of it, you thought that the Lions had a versatile draft, a lot of players who could play multiple positions for them?
Well, I think it's what you're looking for is an impactful draft. You know, how are those guys down the line going to work? Webster, the corner they drafted, Freeze, is he going to be the kicker? Swanson, is he going to be the center for a long time? I mean, you know, the truth is, Kevin, it's hard to evaluate a draft until guys actually play. We can sit and we can talk and we can project, but the bottom line is guys have to play. You know, people were very excited last year because they drafted Darius Slay in the 2nd round. Well, Darius Slay didn't have an impact really on this football team last year. The Lions hope his best days are yet to come, but it's just an example of how when you evaluate something based on what you think a guy's going to be, those results may not show up for a while. So I think, you know, Darius Slay is obviously a big part of this team going forward, but it's just so hard to evaluate.
Put a grade on it.
Yeah,
before
I mean, you know what? We have to do it because that's what we do. But the truth is, it's you know, so illogical to try to assess how a guy's going to develop the day after you draft him.
And as you know, Dan, the Lions have their fan base extends across the border into Canada. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on the Canadian support the team receives.
I think it's awesome. You know, I mean, look, there's a bridge and a tunnel that are between us, and people go back and forth all the time. And I think it's, you know, I've met tons of fans that come over for game day, and what's not to like? A Lions fan is a Lions fan, and I think that's fantastic. And, you know, the best part to me about Sundays is the game, but it's also the fans. And it's the experience that you see down at Ford Field, and it's walking in and out of the building. And you know what? When I see somebody in Honolulu blue, I don't know where they're from. I just know they're a Lions fan, and that's great to have them there on Sunday.
And in terms of your level of concern, what are you most concerned about going into this season? And conversely, what has you most excited?
Most excited is the offense and what I think it can do for Matthew Stafford and how I think he's going to elevate his game. I mean, we haven't seen an offense with this many weapons since probably the 90s. Certainly when they had, Barry and Herman and Johnny Morton and Paramount, all those guys, just great players. I think defensively you can name some of those guys too in terms of the talent and what they brought in. I think what concerns me is the cornerback position. I'm no different than anybody else. I think they're okay at safety. I think Ihedebo is going to fill that spot. I think Glover Quinn's top notch. I think, you have linebackers that have performed for this team, and Van Noy's the rookie. Defensive end, little concern until we see how, Ziggy takes the next step, Taylor takes the next step, and Jason Jones comes back from his injury and how those guys play. So, I think probably corner is my number one concern. And I'll give you another one is kicker. I mean, we don't know how Freeze is going to do, but I remind people, for a long time we took Jason Hansen and just took it for granted that he was going to be there. But remember, this kicker is somebody that a couple times a year you may send out with a minute to go to win a game. This has got to be somebody you can count on, and it's got to be somebody good. So whether it's Freeze or whoever wins that competition, that's another question going in.
And if you had to single out an X factor for the Lions, someone that may be flying under the radar, that may play a pivotal role for their success in 2014, who would that be and why?
I'll throw one at you that just not a lot of people are talking about, and that's Devin Taylor. And I think that's a position where he could end up playing a lot at defensive end. Towards the end of last year, I really thought he came on and did some very nice things, but there's a position there that's wide open for him to be an impactful player. And when you have Sue and Fairley inside and they're taking up the kind of, attention from the defense that they are, you're going to have one-on-one coverage from the outside. You're going to have great opportunities. I think Ziggy's going to be Ziggy. I think he's developing. I think he's going to be good. But the one guy that people kind of aren't talking about is Devin Taylor. And I think he could be the kind of the X factor that could really take a step up. And then one of those young corners. Whoever it is, be it Bentley, Slay, Greenwood, whoever it is, somebody's stepping up and grabbing one of those spots.
And in terms of transitioning ownership with Mr. Ford passing away, how do you think that transition's going, and how would you forecast the future of the team?
I think it's a significant loss, obviously, for the organization because of the type of person that he was and the relationships that he forged with people that have, passed through here, been here for a long time. Whatever the case, he was somebody that made an impact on you when you had a chance to sit and talk with him or meet him. But I think one of the measures of anybody in that position is, did they build a structure whereas if something does happen, it goes forward? And I think he did that. And I think, with Tom Lawan, with Martin Mayhew, with a guy like Lou Perez on the business side, and Elizabeth Parkinson that do a lot of the things that people don't see, game day experience, things like that, not on the field stuff. He had people in place that will carry this forward, and his wife and the children. And I anticipate that there will be a seamless and has been a seamless transition, as exemplified by Bill Ford Jr. getting involved in Golden Tate, shortly after his father passed away, and helping to make sure that signing actually went through.
Talk to me about Nick Fairley and his not picking up his 2015 option. Do you think that was a smart move? Or?
I think it was a move to motivate Nick. I think Nick Fairley has Pro Bowl talent, and he hasn't lived up to that. I don't think you get the consistent effort that you look for, and I think this is going to be a telling year for him. There's a lot out there for Nick Fairley. There's a lot of money sitting on the table. He just has to play well enough to grab it. I think it was probably a smart move by the organization to not guarantee him $5 million or put him on the books for $5 million for next year. Let him go earn it. And believe me, if Nick Fairley has the kind of year that Nick Fairley is capable of having, Nick Fairley's going to make a whole lot of money because he can be a big-time player in this league. But your best players are your hardest working players, and he hasn't been that guy yet.
And so you talk about hardest working players, and one of the hardest working players for the Lions is clearly Kelvin Johnson. Do you think that the team is motivated to get a winning product around him specifically?
I think when you have a player that is that great, that hasn't had a chance to win, that might enter some of their minds. But you know what? I'm always impressed by the fact that the guys that come to Detroit and play in Detroit are cognizant of the history of Lions football, which hasn't been great. And they want to be the team, and they want to be the player, and they want to be part of the group that ultimately turns that thing around. That means something to them. So as much as they may want to do something for Calvin, I think they want to do something that kind of puts them in the position of being part of that team that finally brings to this city something that they've lacked for a long time, and that's a winning, consistent program and a team that can get to and compete for a Super Bowl.
Martin Mayhew's obviously been at this a while now. Do you consider this season a pivotal season for him specifically in order to show significant progress to where the Lions want to go?
Yeah, I think every season's pivotal. You know, if you're asking me if this is a make or break season for Martin Mayhew, if I look at the scope of what happened, they just hired a new coach, they just hired a new staff. I think probably they go hand in hand, Mayhew and the coach and the staff, so they probably get a couple years, 2 years to make that work. But I don't think Martin Mayhew would tell you anything other than he expects to win now. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's had enough time to put this thing together. He'd be the first one to tell you that. So they need to win. And I can't predict whether or not he'd be fired, but it just seems a new coach usually, notwithstanding what you had in Cleveland this year, new coaches normally get more than a year to make something happen, and I kind of see them as a package. But that's not to say they have any room for error, and it's not to say that there's some built-in pad. This isn't a 2-year plan, it's a 1-year plan. This team's good enough to win now. They should win now.
And in terms of looking at the big picture of this franchise, I'm wondering if you could assess the state of the franchise and where they stand today.
I think you look at the franchise, you have Ndamukong Suh, one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. You have Calvin Johnson, Matthew Stafford, Reggie Bush, young offensive linemen, and an offensive line that as a whole played well last year. A linebacking core that played well. 2 safeties that are you know, Glover Quinn is a terrific player, and James Ahedibo, I think, is a guy that can be an impactful player in the way they're going to utilize that safety to come up a little bit more in the box and make tackles. The state of the franchise in Detroit is fantastic. They've got a great building. They've got great fans. They just need to put it together on the field. I think the pieces are there to do that, and then everything else takes care of itself.
My final question for you, obviously, calling Lions games for you personally must be a thrill. I'm wondering if you could share with us your fondest memory thus far as the voice of the Lions.
I would think that's a pretty easy one. Yes, it is a thrill. It's a dream come true for me to look. When I was young in this business, I used to sit in the press box and I would watch the announcers walk in and they would go to the booth. And I would just think, man, I want to be that. I want to be that guy who gets to come in and go to the booth and call the game. And I'm blessed that I've been able to do that. My biggest thrill is easy. It was the game against San Diego where they clinched a playoff spot. It was electric inside that building. And they put together a run on San Diego and made some big plays, Cliff Averill with the touchdown. And it was just such a... It was a small thing where some franchises are concerned, because for some franchises, they expect to make the playoffs every year. For this franchise, that wasn't the case. It was a big day. It meant so much to see the fans and how excited and happy they were. So for me, it was that day, that feeling, that incredible moment, which hopefully one day is just a footnote to a bunch of playoff appearances and playoff victories and things like that. Jim Schwartz said it that day. He said, normally you want to get to the point where you don't celebrate just making the playoffs, but that was a day worthy of celebration, and it was just electric inside that building.
Dad, thanks for a couple of minutes, and we'll be sure to watch you on Sportsworks every Sunday night at 11 o'clock, and I wish you and your radio partner, Jim Bradstatter, all the very best as you get set to call another exciting season of Detroit Lions football.
Look forward to it, Kevin. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
For the Two-Man Advantage, I'm Kevin McShan.